From New York, this is Democracy Now!
I think that we should be vaccinating teachers. We should move them up in the hierarchy as well.
As President Biden backs prioritizing COVID-19 vaccines for teachers, we look at the debate over how to safely reopen schools during the pandemic. We'll speak to Randy Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers, and Stacey Davis Gates of the Chicago Teachers Union, which just agreed to a deal reopening schools. Then we go to Bessemer, Alabama, where Amazon workers are voting on whether to become the first unionized Amazon warehouse in the country.
If the union was so bad, why are they doing everything they can to keep it out of here?
This is a story about David and Goliath. Right now I'm being David, and I'm fighting Goliath, and we all know how that story ended.
Plus, we speak to Sarah Jaffe, author of the new book, Work Won't Love You Back: How Devotion to Our Jobs Keeps Us Exploited, Exhausted, and Alone.
The expectation that we're going to love our jobs and do them under all sorts of horrific conditions has taken over the way we think about work today.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. At least 23 people have been killed and millions remain without power as a major winter storm sweeps across large swaths of the country, bringing record-breaking cold and snow. An overwhelmed and underprepared power grid in Texas plunged millions into freezing cold and darkness. Hundreds of thousands also lost power across parts of Appalachia as well as in Oregon. This is a resident of Denton, Texas.
We had a fireplace and I burnt up all the wood we had. This is sad. This is a sad state of affairs. I wish it were better, but somebody's got to do some planning after all this is over and make sure there's an alternative source of energy.
Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott took to Fox News Tuesday to blame renewable energy for his state's blackouts, saying the Green New Deal would be deadly for the U.S. His comments contradicted Texas's own energy department, which said the outages were due to, quote, frozen instruments at natural gas, coal, and even nuclear facilities. New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, quote, the infrastructure failures in Texas are quite literally what happens when you don't pursue a Green New Deal, she said. Texas set up its own power grid, ERCOT, in the 1930s to avoid federal regulation. Prisoners in Texas, including 1,000 women at the Fort Worth Federal Medical Prison, reported having no heat. In Matamoros, Mexico, which sits on the border with Brownsville, Texas, around 1,000 asylum seekers who are denied entry into the United States as part of Trump's Remain in Mexico policy were forced to face the sub-freezing temperatures inside low-grade tents. In North Carolina, a tornado killed at least 3 people. The winter storm also disrupted states' vaccination programs, stalling deliveries and shutting down vaccine sites across Texas. In Harris County, health officials rushed to distribute thousands of vaccine doses after storage freezers lost power. President Biden held a town hall hosted by CNN in Milwaukee Tuesday evening, where he was questioned by host Anderson Cooper about vaccine availability.
When is every American who wants it going to be able to get a vaccine?
By the end of July of this year. When we came into office, there was only 50 million doses that are available. We have now, by the end of July, we'll have over 600 million doses, enough to vaccinate every single American.
President Biden urged people to support the $1.9 trillion coronavirus stimulus package that House Democrats are working to finalize. A House vote is expected at the end of next week. Meanwhile, the Biden administration extended the federal moratorium on foreclosures through the end of June. Biden also extended the window to request mortgage forbearance, as well as 6 months of additional forbearance for homeowners who enroll by the end of June. NAACP filed a lawsuit Tuesday against former President Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and far-right groups for inciting the deadly U.S. Capitol insurrection on January 6th. The lawsuit, brought on behalf of Mississippi Congressmember and House Homeland Security Chair Benny Thompson, says Trump and others violated the 1871 Ku Klux Klan Act, which is supposed to protect Black people and lawmakers from white supremacist violence. NAACP President Derek Johnson said, quote, "The insurrection was the culmination of a carefully orchestrated months-long plan to destroy democracy, to block the results of a fair and democratic election, and to disenfranchise hundreds of thousands of African-American voters who cast valid ballots," unquote. France's National Assembly approved the controversial so-called anti-separatism bill Tuesday, which the government says will strengthen France's secular principles and help counter the rise of militant Islamist groups. But critics say the laws unfairly target Muslim communities and could deprive them of their civil rights. Among other things, the bill strengthens the government's ability to shut down places of worship and religious schools and ban what it deems to be extremist religious leaders. The legislation now heads to the French Senate, where it's also expected to pass. French President Emmanuel Macron joined the heads of state of Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, and Niger this week via video link for a summit on the mounting crisis in the Sahel. France said it's seeking to avoid an infinite war, but did not have immediate plans to draw down its 5,100 troops in the West African region. Meanwhile, Chad says it plans to deploy 1,200 troops to combat armed groups associated with the Islamic State and al-Qaeda. According to one tally, 7,000 people were killed due to the Sahel conflict last year, while the UN warned over 2 million have been displaced. In Spain, the arrest of a rapper over his song lyrics and tweets has sparked protests and fierce scrutiny over the government's control of freedom of speech. Pablo Hasél was arrested Tuesday after barricading himself inside a university to avoid serving a prison term for, quote, glorifying terrorism, unquote, and insulting the monarchy. Hasél referred to former King Juan Carlos as a drunken tyrant and showed support for the Basque separatist group ETA, among other charges. This is Hasél speaking from inside the university where he was barricaded.
Either we have an overwhelming and organized response to these severe attacks from the state, or they will keep cutting our most fundamental rights and freedoms. We have to stop this. There might be people thinking that this does not affect them directly, but of course it does. When one of us loses a right, the working class as a whole loses it.
In response to the public outcry over Hasél's case, the Spanish government has said it will ease its restrictions on free speech. Back in the United States, BuzzFeed reports the Biden administration has directed Homeland Security officials to stop using the terms alien and illegal alien when referring to immigrants and asylum seekers, terms immigrant rights advocates have long called out for being dehumanizing and racist. This comes as a new report reveals President Biden and other Democrats received more campaign money from leading border security and immigration prison corporations than Trump and fellow Republicans during the 2020 election season. According to the report by Transnational Institute, American Friends Service Committee, and Mi Gente, Biden received over $5 million from border security executives, while Trump got $1.7 million in campaign contributions from them. In Georgia, meat plant workers who survived a deadly liquid nitrogen leak at a Gainesville poultry processing plant last month say they're being discriminated against and intimidated as they try to file compensation claims and get medical care. 6 people were killed. Nearly a dozen others were hospitalized at the plant, which is owned by the Foundation Food Group. Most of the workers in Gainesville's meat processing plants are Latinx. In media news, the hedge fund Alden Global Capital has struck a deal to fully acquire Tribune Publishing, publisher of the Chicago Tribune and other major publications. John Schlois, president of the News Guild, tweeted, quote, "A terrible deal for the company, the workers, the shareholders, and our democracy. Alden is only interested in extreme short-term profits by cutting everything to the bone. They have no long-term plan. #SaveLocalNews," unquote. However, some Tribune papers, including the Baltimore Sun and the Capital Gazette, will instead be acquired by a nonprofit formed by hotel executive Stuart Bynum, Jr. And renowned Palestinian author and poet Mourid Barghouti died Sunday at the age of 76 in Amman, Jordan. Barghouti spent most of his life in exile, writing about his Palestinian homeland and the Israeli occupation. He married the acclaimed Egyptian writer Radwa Ashur, who died in 2014. In his autobiographical novel, I Saw Ramallah, in which he returns to his Palestinian hometown after an absence of 30 years, Barghouti writes, "The calm of the place of exile and its wish for safety is never completely realized. The homeland does not leave the body until the last moment, the moment of death," he wrote. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today's show looking at the state of the nation's school a year into the COVID-19 pandemic. On Tuesday night, President Biden said teachers should be given higher priority to get vaccines, and he pledged to reopen the majority of elementary schools in his first 100 days. Biden made the comments at a town hall meeting in Milwaukee hosted by CNN's Anderson Cooper.
I think that we should be vaccinating teachers. We should move them up in the hierarchy as well.
Well, let me ask you, your administration had set a goal to open the majority of schools in your first 100 days. You're now saying that means those schools may only be open for at least one day a week.
No, that's not true. That's what was reported. That's not true. It was a mistake in the communication. But what I'm talking about is I said opening the majority of schools in K through 8th grade because they're the easiest to open, the most needed to be open in terms of the impact on children and families having to stay home.
So when do you think that would be K through 8, at least 5 days a week, if possible?
I think we'll be close to that at the end of the first 100 days. We'd have a significant percentage of them being able to be opened. My guess is they're going to probably be pushing to open all summer, to continue like it's a different semester.
Do you think that would be 5 days a week or just a couple?
I think many of them 5 days a week. The goal will be 5 days a week. Now, it's going to be harder to open up the high schools for the reasons I said.
President Biden speaking Tuesday night. And this comes as many school districts across the nation are debating how to safely bring children back into the classroom. In Chicago, the city's begun reopening schools for the district's youngest students following a fight between the city and the teachers' union over COVID protocols. Meanwhile, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has faced criticism for saying schools can be reopened safely before teachers are vaccinated. This is CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky speaking earlier this month.
I would also say that safe reopening of schools is not, that vaccination of teachers is not a prerequisite for safe reopening of schools.
We're joined now by two guests. Randy Weingarten is president of the American Federation of Teachers, and Stacey Davis Gates is executive vice president of the Chicago Teachers Union. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Let's begin here in New York. Randy Weingarten, talk about the state of the schools in New York City and what the American Federation of Teachers is demanding.
So, you know, what we're demanding in New York and what we're demanded in Chicago, and I'm so glad that you have Stacey on, is quite similar. There's a protocol of about 5 things, including, you know, prioritizing teachers for vaccines, using testing like the NFL does, like industry does, as a way of really seeing what's unseen. And then the kind of the safety protocols that were in the CDC guidance, including, and Chicago and New York have done a good job about this because the union has pushed it so hard, including making sure that those who are at risk or who are taking care of people at risk have reasonable accommodations. And so when you have these kind of protocols together and you have safety committees and ways in which you make sure that these are enforced, what we just saw in a recent poll we released last night is that the people who are in school trust it and trust that they're going to be safe. And so 88% of my membership in this poll that we just did last week said if we could get these protocols they will feel comfortable being in school. They know it's important. And that includes 73% of those who are on remote right now.
So what's happening in New York right now? Who is back in school? Who is doing remote learning? And what do you see as the timetable?
So what's happening in New York right now is that elementary schools, so parents have a choice in all of these districts whether or not they have their kids in person or on remote. In New York City, they reopened everything in a hybrid basis, in a blended basis in September, October, and November. In November, when the rates started going very high in New York, there was a 3-week pause, and then they reopened in December elementary schools and special ed and kids with special needs first. So pre-K, elementary, and kids with special needs. And those kids are back in schools most of the week. This Monday and Tuesday, they will start reopening in New York City middle schools. And what they have in New York City, which is the key to this reopening, is a very fulsome testing program so that 20 to 25% of people every week, kids and teachers, get tested to rapid antigen and PCR tests to see if there's COVID transmission in school. And there's real protocols about if there's a case, that classroom gets closed. If there's 2 or 3 non-vectored cases, meaning cases after you contract trace, cases coming from different ways, the school will get closed for 10 days or so. And that has been what has kept the schools open and transmission down. So it is both the protocols that CDC talked about that prevent transmission, but also the testing so that you see it. And finally, and this is what Stacey pushed for really hard in Chicago, and what Michael Mulgrew, our leader in New York, pushed for really hard in New York, is the vaccinations. And over 15,000 New York City school teachers, people who are, in schools first, have gotten their first, some have gotten their second dose of the vaccination. And I'm really glad that President Biden said last night that teachers should be prioritized. We've tried to do that for the last several months. We pushed very hard for the CDC to prioritize teachers. If schools were supposed to be open for in-person learning, because that's important, then we need that extra layer of protection for teachers, just like obviously for healthcare workers and for nursing homes. But it has not happened in most places. 24 states do prioritize teachers, but we have not seen that in action as much as we should.
So, Stacey Gates, the NEA, the National Education Association, just did a survey. They said 82% of teachers have not been vaccinated. 70% will feel safer about working in person once vaccinated. 20% of white educators are vaccinated. 9% of black educators are vaccinated. Can you talk about the significance of this?
I think the significance of this entire pandemic has fallen along the lines of race, racism, equity, and inequity. And what we see here is the collapse of a society. At the same time, we need the most. For instance, we're having a discussion about reopening schools without understanding what types of schools we're reopening. There is a standard that I think most people are thinking of when they think of schools. They're not thinking of schools on the west side of Chicago whose facilities haven't been upgraded for a generation. They're not thinking of schools on the south side of Chicago that have been perpetually unclean because we have privatized our janitorial staff. These are things that should be added to the context of CDC guidelines. CDC guidelines are only as important as they can be implemented in places that have the resources to implement it. places that have administrative fortitude and a workforce that are willing to enforce it. Guidelines are one thing, the implementation and then the enforcement are quite another. And in Chicago, we have a hard time believing that under mayoral control that we would have the type of enforcement of these guidelines all by itself, because we haven't seen that indeed. Again, it won't be into the end of our contract until we have a nurse in every school. There's not a social worker in every school. So when I hear people talk about kids need to be in school because of all of the things that our schools provide, well, you need to come to Chicago and see what our schools have and don't have, and struggle with the educators, the paraprofessionals, the school clerks, the clinicians, the tech coordinators that are trying to make that happen here in Chicago. We fought for a nurse in every school. We have fought for air conditioning in school. We only have 4 schools on the west side of Chicago that have school libraries. It's not just the context of opening schools, it's reopening schools safely with the resources that are necessary to keep people safe.
So, Stacey, the Chicago Teachers Union and the Chicago Public Schools have reached an agreement last week to reopen elementary and middle schools amidst the pandemic. By early March, students who have been learning remotely for 10 months will be back in the classrooms. What is key to understand about this agreement and the tense negotiations that took place between the union, the school district, and Mayor Lightfoot? And where did parents and students come down in this negotiation?
Well, one of the things that I would like to dispel is that there is a separation of parents and teachers. I myself am a high school history teacher with 3 children in the Chicago Public Schools, as are many of our colleagues in the Chicago Public Schools. So to erect this false narrative that parents and teachers are on opposite sides when we are actually the same person is absolutely ridiculous. That's one. Number 2, this was a discussion about the inequities of the pandemic. If we're looking at Chicago right now and we're looking at the communities and the zip codes, because Chicago is still so very segregated, that were ravaged under COVID-19, and we look at the distribution of vaccines in Chicago as in the same communities, we see an inequity. When we look at the Chicago Public Schools and how our schools are funded in the city, we see that same inequity. So the struggle to get the agreement is based on generations of neglect and defunding and deprioritization. Again, why would I trust you to have my back in a pandemic when I was unable to trust you to have my back in non-pandemic times? This boils down to a legacy of distrust because we've been deprioritized. Again, Chicago Public Schools under mayoral control closed 50 schools that educated Black children. Again, in a pandemic that is killing Black people 3 times more than white people, why would you have infrastructure of trust there? You have to rebuild the trust and the confidence of the individuals who will be attending these school communities, going inside of these buildings, as well as showing where the resources have been implemented and also maintaining the implementation of those resources. We're in a pandemic. I don't think it's unreasonable for people to have an expectation that you pull together in the same direction and that you front safety as the uniting factor.
I want to read a quote from Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot, who was recently interviewed by the New York Times. She said, quote, "I understand that the notion that we would lock teachers out was disturbing to all. It should be. But it should also be disturbing when teachers say, I don't care what you say, I don't care what you do, I'm not going to abide by the contract or the rules that have been set for my place of employment," Lightfoot said. That's chaos. Stacey Davis Gates, if you could respond.
I don't think there is a response to that. For the life of me, I do not know why any politician would harbor ill will and provoke fights with teachers, with paraprofessionals and school clerks, tech coordinators, and social workers, counselors, librarians. I don't understand that. Furthermore, the members of the Chicago Teachers Union in coalition with parents and students across the city have struggled together. They've struggled together to get an elected school board. They've struggled together to get cops out of schools. They've struggled together to get nurses and social workers inside of schools, to bring the issue of housing and security to the forefront and fight for housing for our students who do not have permanent housing. So this concept that we're not partners is simply another misleading action statement from the mayor of the city.
And if you can talk about the importance of organizing and striking right now in this period during the pandemic, the most effective way you see to keep the schools safe and to bring everyone back together.
Well, the most effective way is going to have to be with democracy. So number one, Chicago has needed an elected school board for a very long time. Our mayor ran under that. She has so far yet to deliver. Democracy provides a very important set of checks and balances where stakeholders across the board have a way in, under which to interact. That's number one. Number two, you have to have a labor union that is committed to the common good struggle, and that we as educators provide a common good. Therefore, we should be at the fore pushing for all of the things that our entity needs, as well as the people that we serve. There's no separation. Humanity basically forces us to provide the type of housing stability, the fight for justice in healthcare, the fight for the full resourcing of our school communities, but our neighborhood communities as well. Look, Chicago has undergone a seismic shift since 2012, when our union with parents, with grassroots organizations, and with students said that Chicago students deserve more than what they have been given. And right now we are continuing to manifest that type of organization, that fight, that advocacy, where all people who are in the city get to win, not just a select few, not just the few who can buy it, but the many who need it.
And before you go, Stacey, I wanted to ask you about Karen Lewis, the former president of the Chicago Teachers Union, who recently passed away at 67 years old. She'd been battling brain cancer. She stepped down from her position at CTU due to her health 4 years later. This is Karen Lewis on Democracy Now! In 2010.
I don't think anybody will argue with that the system is broken. It has not basically changed since the 1900s, 1800s for that matter. And as a result, it has never been able to absorb real innovation. And the problem is it's just a lot easier to test children. Our curriculum has narrowed in Chicago. If you look at the average day for an elementary school kid, it's reading, math. Reading, math. I mean, kids are bored to tears. They're hating school at an early age. There's no joy, there's no passion, and the results show that.
So that's Karen Lewis in 2010. Your thoughts on her passing and her significance as former head of the Chicago Teachers Union?
Obviously, with her passing, I not only miss a great leader, I miss a friend, someone who cared for me and very generously gave me an opportunity to work in this movement and to be powerful in this movement. And number two, I think her significance is that she has shifted the trajectory of the expectations of everyone in the city of Chicago. Nationally, she has triggered red from the West Coast to the East Coast to the northern part to the southern part of our country. And as a Black woman, she walked in her power, she walked in truth, and she defended Black children, she lifted up Black parents, and she gave us an example of how you lead in coalition, how you distribute power and provide a bellwether, if you will, for leaders who are committed to social justice.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Stacey Davis Gates, Executive Vice President of the Chicago Teachers Union, and Randy Weingarten, President of the American Federation of Teachers. Next up, we go to Bessemer, Alabama, where Amazon workers are voting on whether to become the first unionized Amazon warehouse in the country. Stay with us.
Especial dedicación al tan mal llamado gobierno progresista que ha perpetuado la represión. que cuando las calles han llenado por la libertad de expresión, poniéndose nerviosos, han vuelto a prometer hacer algo, volviendo a quedar en humo. Intentan parar la movilización, pero solo con esta ganaremos el pulso. Oye, tirano, no solo hay pa' tu padre que el grito republicano, tu tímpano taladre, al oprimido amo, odio el reinado opresor, que coma tu familia del contenedor. Hay una vida mejor que impedís violentos, que goces tu Rolex, llega al fin de estos tiempos. La Guardia Civil lo que siento examina, voy a decir como Corina, guillotina. Vuestra política asesina combatimos, sois vosotros quienes enaltecéis terrorismos. Con terror queréis que no digan lo mismo otros, la justicia os desquicia como a Leticia el Botox. Como piedras contra pop sonará este rap, jódete, pide mi libertad hasta Joan Manuel Serrat. Que 12.000 se derrochen cada noche del campechano, nombre de cada arruinado, la guerra os declaramos. No hay quien me quite esto ni Felipe VI, muestro la verdad en el remite de mi texto. Hijos de Franco condenando por ser franco, crecerá la semilla de libertad que planto. No hay quien me quite esto ni Felipe VI.
That's the Spanish rapper Pablo Hasél, who was arrested in the Catalan city of Lleida on Tuesday for insulting Spain's former king and for showing support for the Basque separatist group ETA. His arrest sparked massive protests in Barcelona and other cities. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Amazon workers in Bessemer, Alabama, are continuing to vote on whether to become the first unionized Amazon warehouse in the United States. The National Labor Relations Board has mailed ballots to nearly 6,000 Amazon workers who'll decide whether to join the retail, wholesale, and department store union. Voting will continue until March 29th. Workers are demanding stronger COVID safety measures and relief from impossibly high productivity standards that leave many unable to take bathroom breaks. The Intercept's reporting Amazon's paying a consultant with ties to the Koch brothers $3,200 a day to thwart the unionization drive. Amazon's also requiring workers to attend anti-union captive audience meetings. One Amazon warehouse worker, Joseph Jones, spoke to Democracy Now! About the meetings.
With one of the meetings, one of their biggest points that they were trying to get us outraged about was, look at this balance sheet of this union. They spent $140,000 on vehicles last year. Can you believe it? So I raised my hand, and in this setting, no one talks, right? Because they always open up for questions, but who's going to speak out to the company unless you just don't care? So my question was, okay, so let me understand your position. You want me to be outraged at the fact that this union spent $140,000 on qualified business expenses, as it seems that you're showing us, but Jeff Bezos makes $150,000 every single minute of every single day, but I'm supposed to be outraged at this. You're like, yeah, yes, aren't you mad? It's crazy.
On Tuesday, Amazon's founder and outgoing CEO Jeff Bezos surpassed Elon Musk to become once again the world's richest person with a wealth of $191 billion. Meanwhile, New York Attorney General Letitia James sued Amazon Tuesday for failing to adequately protect workers during the pandemic. In the lawsuit, James argues, quote, Amazon's extreme profits and exponential growth rate came at the expense of the lives, health, and safety of its frontline workers, unquote. We go now to Bessemer, Alabama, where we're joined by two guests. Jennifer Bates is a worker at Amazon's Bessemer warehouse who's been part of the union drive from the beginning. And Michael Foster's an organizer with the RWDSU, Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. He's also a poultry worker at a chicken plant in Alabama. Upwards of 80% of the Bessemer workers are black, and the majority are women. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Jennifer, let's begin with you. You work in the plant. We're so glad we're able to speak to you right now. Talk about why you're organizing. What are the conditions in the plant?
Well, the reason why we're organizing is because we need an even playing field. Some of the conditions that are in there are being ignored by human resources, long work hours with only 2 breaks, long walks upstairs and downstairs. We have plenty of elevators in the building, but they're only used for merchandise. You can put the merchandise on the elevators, but we have to turn around, send it upstairs and go to the back halls, just like at a hotel, and take the stairs up to the floor that we're taking it to. So there are a lot of health issues. Another thing is with the COVID-19, they told us that they were advise us of those who have it or if we work near them. So they haven't done well with that. So it's a lot of excessive working. It's just like working out. You have intense workout for 9 hours, but you only get 2-hour breaks within a 10-hour span. So we want to be heard. We want to be treated like people and not ignored when we have issues. People are getting fired without having their opportunity to speak their side.
So can you explain what Amazon is doing about this effort, the unionizing effort? You're in the midst of the vote, and it goes on for several weeks. If, in fact, the Amazon workforce votes for the union, it'll be the first time an Amazon warehouse has been unionized in the entire country.
Yes. Well, some of the things that they're doing is having the the classroom teaching seminars, that's what I call it, with the slideshows talking to us about why we shouldn't have a union and don't let anyone come in and get between our relationships. They've put flyers on the back walls of the bathroom stalls where we used to have updated, things that are going on in the company. So now it's been replaced with things of why we shouldn't vote for the union, and they're coming to our workstations where we're working at, speaking to us about the reasons why you're going to be called an outsider if you don't vote yes, telling us that the union is going to, they're thieves, and what they do with their money is go on lavish vacations and buy nice cars. So they're coming to us, and even some of the younger people are they're afraid. They're afraid now. They were for the union because they realized that we needed it, but now because of the meeting that they were put in, they're afraid they're going to lose their insurance, or some of the leadership are walking around telling people if you vote the union, Amazon will shut down, so there won't be any jobs here.
I wanted to bring Michael Foster into this conversation. You work at a nearby poultry plant. But you're a union organizer with RWDSU. Both you as well as Jennifer are part of this drive to unionize Amazon's warehouse. You've called it a David versus Goliath struggle. Explain.
Well, just like the story that we all know, Amazon is Goliath. Amazon has become one of the biggest industries in our world right now. Amazon is a very powerful business, one of the most profitable businesses it is in the United States right now. So Amazon has a lot of authority going on right now, and we, as the union, trying to take on Amazon in a right-to-work state gives you the perfect image of David and Goliath.
Now, we heard something about a traffic light right by the warehouse that Amazon asked the city to change because when people stopped at the red light, there were union organizers out there urging the workers going into the plant to vote yes on the union. Can you talk about this, Michael?
Yes, ma'am. I'm personally one of the guys that be down on the block and speaking with Amazon workers as they go in and out at this particular traffic light. And we had the privilege to be able to talk to them because the traffic light stops them and we have the opportunity to talk to them. But right now, as soon as they get the urge to roll down their window, their light has turned green. We cannot even say 2 words to each other. So that stopped a lot of our conversation and engaging with the Amazon employees.
So In the lead, we talked about Amazon paying a consultant with ties to the Koch brothers something like $3,200 a day to thwart the unionization drive. The consultant, Russell Brown, is the president of the Koch-backed Center for Independent Employees and the head of RWP Labor, which claims it helps companies maintain a union-free workplace. Your thoughts on this?
I think with Amazon using this tactic that they're using, with this guy coming in making $3,200 a day, to me is just one of the most horrible things I've heard of. To me, if Amazon was concerned about their people, and they people have showed that they want to unionize and have a voice to speak out. If Amazon cared anything about their employees, they would not come up against them with this type of tactic. This tactic is being processed in people's minds. It's been hammered into people's minds. I have people call me asking me, can they do something, because they do not want to go to these meetings. These meetings are mandatory. They're hammering in their mind, changing their thoughts, planting fear in their mind, if you ask me. And that's something that Amazon is striving to do. I think it's their intentions is to provide fear into their minds so they will not join a union, so they will not have a voice, and allow Amazon to continue to do what they're doing right now.
The issue of Amazon flooding the warehouse with new workers to expand the number in the bargaining union, can you talk about the challenge of this?
Oh man, it was a big challenge. We had already submitted the vote, the issue, because if you look on the website, Amazon said they built a new facility in Bessemer for 1,500 workers. So Amazon went on a hiring spree that is unheard of in the United States to dictate the percentage of the numbers that we had to have, because we had to have 30% of the total number in order to submit to be able to have a vote. And Amazon done this, and after we have submitted this, we only had a day or two time to go back out and try to get more cards. You know, we don't know what specific number we needed. All we knew is that we had to go out and get more people to be able to sign an authorization card. And with the blessings of God and just us working hard and praying, he allowed us to achieve that goal.
Jennifer Bates, it is fascinating that this unionizing effort that could be the first unionized warehouse of Amazon in the country is happening in what's known as the anti-union South. It's a majority black workforce in a majority black town. Most of the workers are women. The significance of this?
Well, I really didn't think that it would be this significant. Starting out, we were nervous at first, but understanding now how it would change history, it will be a big impact, because it looks like Amazon is choosing a lot of low-income communities. And I think because of that, it's bringing a lot of light, and this will be one of the first Amazon facilities that people remember from this day forward. And then it's Black history.
And can you talk about the schedule of the vote? How long do people have to vote? It began last week, the voting.
They have until March 29th to get all the ballots in.
March 29th to get all the ballots in. Michael Foster, can you talk about why you see the union organizing here as a racial justice issue? I'm looking at a piece in Wired that talks about the history of your union, RWDSU, the union having black leadership since its founding in the 30s, a time when some unions excluded black workers. Its members organized alongside Martin Luther King Jr. during the 1963 March on Washington. In 1968, the union became the first to secure a contract designating King's birthday a paid holiday.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. that's something that I'm proud of. That this is a mostly black union right here, and Bessemer, Amazon is mostly black, and the city of Bessemer is percentage of black. And I think that if you look, the city of Bessemer is one of the poorest cities in Alabama. Bessemer, and I believe Amazon knows this because they have the initiative to say that we're paying you $15 an hour, and that's above minimum wage, and you should be happy about that. Like, you know, because they're offering a little bit more money than some of the places around here. They feel like that gives them the means to continue to keep the press on the African Americans, I think. We have a saying that we think our people should have a living wage, not a minimum wage, because people are just tired of just paying their bills and just barely making it to the next week when you're working at a facility that's owned by the richest man in the world. You working at a facility in the last 3 months have accumulated $90-something billion, and none of the employees received anything for this. I like to tell the employees all the time that Amazon is just a building. You guys are Amazon. Without you guys, there is no Amazon. And I think by them coming in a city like this, they felt like that they could take advantage of these people because they taking advantage of their means of having money, their living means. And Amazon is not here to help. At the RWDSU, we are here to not only bring a better environment to the Amazon workers, but to their community as well. We want to get out into the community as well, help the people in Amazon earn a better wage so they can help some family members that they have also.
Finally, Jennifer Bates, your message to the richest man in the world, to the CEO of Amazon, Jeff Bezos.
Well, I don't have a message to him, but because I think I know that he knows very well what's going on. He's made billions off of the backs of low-income people, so he already knows. And I heard a video that he spoke that we don't need anyone to come between us, and he sent us a message that we're already giving you good benefits, and we're already giving you a competitive wage. So it doesn't look like he wants to move, have a stance on the working conditions. So for years, and just finding out last week that there are other Amazons who's been complaining as well. So I think he very well knows what's going on, and he doesn't want to move to change. But
this plant opened at the beginning of the pandemic in March?
Yes.
Well, Jennifer Bates, I want to thank you for being with us, worker at Amazon's BHM1 Fulfillment Center in Bessemer, and Michael Foster, poultry plant worker and member organizer of RWDSO. Both Jennifer and Michael are part of the drive to unionize Amazon's warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama. When we come back, we speak to Sarah Jaffe. Her new book, Work Won't Love You Back. Stay with us. What's Mine is Yours by Slater Kinney here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As Congress debates whether to raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour, fast food workers in 15 cities held a Black History Month strike Tuesday as part of the Fight for 15 campaign and to emphasize the, quote, crisis among Black communities who face generations of low pay and insufficient protections on the job. These are some of their voices.
Hi, my name is Mark Logan. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, a fast food worker at McDonald's. Minimum wage is $9.45. That's not enough. I'm going on strike today for $15 an hour in the union job.
My name is Sequoia Carroll. I'm a member of McDonald's and a member of the NC Fight 15. I've been in this organization for 6 years. I'm doing this because my kids need me. I'm pregnant with a baby on the way. It's the third baby, and I already have 2 kids. I can't take this no more. There was times when I didn't have a break. I came in on my day off, and my own manager didn't tell me how much I'm getting paid an hour. The highest check I ever got was literally $291. I can't take it no more. I'm halfway homeless. I need this $15 an hour, not only for me, but for everybody.
I was 16 years old, first day working in fast food. Just like the young lady that spoke today, fresh on the job, I didn't understand what was going on. So I learned to put an armor on. I continue to smile and be friendly with my customers, and I teach the crew to put on the same armor that I wear. But this armor gets heavy, real heavy when you can't pay your bills.
Yeah, right.
That last voice, Taco Bell worker Erica Hunt at a Fight for 15 protest in Wisconsin Tuesday. For more on fast food workers, teachers, nurses, gig workers, many others organizing to improve conditions, we're joined by Sarah Jaffe, longtime labor economic justice reporter who writes about all of this in her new book, Work Won't Love You Back: How Devotion to Our Jobs Keeps Us Exploited, Exhausted, and Alone. Her feature in the new issue of The Nation magazine is headlined, First Nurses Saved Our Lives, Now They're Saving Our Health Care. Sarah, you are following our first discussion about the teachers' unions fighting for safe workplaces for kids to return to around the country, to their schools. And then we talked about this first-time union vote organizing effort in Bessemer, Alabama, at an Amazon warehouse. Your thoughts on jobs right now?
I think pretty much everyone's job has gotten a lot worse in the last year, right? Whether you're like me and suddenly you're trapped in this tiny little box here that you see me in pretty much, for 10 hours a day, every day, or you're like those fast food workers or Amazon workers you were just talking to who have to go into a workplace knowing that that workplace has just gotten a lot more dangerous. I think we're all realizing how much worse things can get. And it's making some of those workers, more willing to stand up and speak out when, it's not just that it's a bad, grinding, slow, miserable job, but it's also a bad, grinding, slow, miserable job that could kill you now.
You talk about the irony of the term Amazon fulfillment centers.
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? Because now we're all expected, like I write about in this book, to find fulfillment from our jobs. But actually, when it comes down to it, we don't work because we're bored and just need something to do with our day. We work, like that last worker who was just speaking was saying, because we have bills to pay. And when that work isn't covering the expenses that people have to feed their families, it's a really big disconnect that we're still expected to show up. And what that last fast food worker was saying about putting on that armor every day was so striking, right? Because I remember from my time working in the service industry, sort of have to go in and push all your feelings down and put on that smile.
You write in your book, once upon a time it was assumed, to put it bluntly, that work sucked. What changed? Describe the evolution of the labor of love myth.
Yeah, so I traced this in the book through the history of sort of women's unpaid work in the home and also the creative work of the artist, both of which are sort of always assumed to not be work at all. And as the decline of industrial labor through outsourcing, through automation, through changes in the shape of capitalism, what we got instead was much more work like the people that we've just been talking about, like those Amazon workers, like those fast food workers, like the nurses and other healthcare workers that I wrote about in that Nation piece you mentioned, whose job is to provide the services that keep us all going, who are doing that so-called essential work that we've heard so much about since the pandemic. And that is work that often requires you to show up and put on that smile, that requires you to, if not actually enjoy it, at least sort of pretend and project the image that you're enjoying it in order to go to work. And so that it's literally a change in just like the shape of the economy and what jobs people are doing. But then that also spreads into things like the Amazon Fulfillment Center, where if the narrative we hear over and over again is that we go to work in order to find fulfillment, then even, you know, the Amazon billboard that I saw the other day off of the New Jersey Turnpike that says, "Get a job delivering smiles," is like, well, the conditions that worker was just describing in the warehouse in Alabama don't sound terribly fulfilling, and they don't sound like they'd make me smile.
So how about teachers now being asked to risk their lives to go back to school? And then, of course, you have nurses doing the same thing, risking their lives every day, and they're not only fighting to save their patients, but now the healthcare system changing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, teachers are, I write in the book, sort of the ultimate laborers of love, and we've had decades, maybe centuries, of expecting them to make up for all of the gaps in the social safety net just by loving the kids that they teach more and more and more. And so, you know, we're seeing right now sort of the real return of this demonizing teachers rhetoric in yet another way, because teachers are not willing to march back into, in many cases, overcrowded, underfunded schools that haven't had repairs. In Philadelphia, they were talking about, like, you know, strapping a box fan to a window to create ventilation so that the virus supposedly wouldn't spread in these school buildings that are overcrowded. In Los Angeles, I think the last time we spoke was when I was in LA for the teachers' strike there, and they were fighting to get class sizes down from 45 students in a room that is supposed to house, you know, 20. And, you know, you can't socially distance with 25 kids in a room, let alone when you've packed 40 of them in a room that is supposed to have 25. So the very things that teachers have been demanding that would have made the schools more safe to reopen in the first place, they're now getting blamed for not being able to solve that problem. And it's just this ongoing expectation that teachers can somehow, with their just pure motivation and love and care, overcome all of these obstacles that we have put as a society in their way.
And nurses, let's end there, since it's also what you wrote your Nation piece on.
Yeah, absolutely. Nurses who have been fighting since the beginning of the pandemic just to get enough masks and gowns to keep them safe while they're trying to save lives. And in between, you know, they've been, the nurses unions like National Nurses United, like New York State Nurses Association, have been the loudest voices in this country saying, for decades, that we need a real national healthcare system that would actually prioritize public health, because this pandemic has taught us that we are only as well as the last person to get vaccinated, as the last person to get health care.
We want to thank you, Sarah Jaffe, for being with us, longtime labor and economic justice reporter. Her new book, Work Won't Love You Back: How Devotion to Our Jobs Keeps Us Exploited, Exhausted, and Alone. That does it for our show. Happy birthday to Neil Shibata. Democracy Now! Is produced with Renee Feltz, Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Libby Rainey, Nermeen Sheikh, Maria Tarasena, Carla Wills, Tammy Warrenoff, Tarina Nadura, Sam Alcoff, Maria Studio, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Honey Massoud, Adriana Contreras. Special thanks to Julie Crosby, Becca Staley. Wearing a mask is an act of love. Wearing two is even better. And try a shield on top of it. I'm Amy Goodman.